Hey statists, we've got some questions for you.
Hey Libertarians, thanks for starting off your video with the same sophomoric approach as all those BuzzFeed videos everyone mocks. It gives me real high hopes that you will address the issue in a scholarly fashion. So let's get to it.
If a kid couldn't afford lunch because the school bullies kept taking a percentage of his allowance, you wouldn't blame the kid's parents for not giving him enough. So why is it that when people struggle financially, you blame the employer who provides them with money and not the government which is taxing them?
In this analogy, you imply that the government is the bully, but taxation is not theft. In the social contract that allows our society to function, the individual gives up certain freedoms to the government, in this case taxation, so that the government can provide roads for them to drive on, police to serve them, firefighters to protect them, and a national military to defend against outside threats. If you don't want to uphold your end of the social contract, that's perfectly fine. Just move somewhere else where no one will provide you with these services out of the goodness of their heart.
For fans of democracy, I would ask, is it okay to forcibly rob, control, or otherwise victimize somebody as long as the majority approves of it?
You were speaking about the tyranny of the majority, sir, and no, that isn't okay. This is why we have documents such as the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that provide the government with limited power so that things like, slavery don't exist.
We all know that every economic system has market failures. Capitalism, socialism, communism, whatever. But my question is, why do you feel morally justified in forcing other people to subsidize these failures? Why should I be forced to subsidize failed electric car companies like Fisker or failed government initiatives like Obamacare? Shouldn't I have the right to decide what risk I want to take with my own money?
Like you said, economic systems are flawed and lead to failure. Without a minimal safety net, the market will have no incentive to innovate because it's an all-or-nothing proposition. Either they get rich or they live on the streets, whether or not it's their fault. And honestly, do you believe people who can't afford medical services aren't deserving of them? And do you honestly believe that every poor person is that way because they choose to be?
How come you want to ban things that you don't like? As long as they're not hurting other people, what's the big deal?
Everyone notices the logical fallacies when BuzzFeed uses them. Why do you think we wouldn't identify this clear attempt at personal incredulity? But to answer your intellectually dishonest question, when someone tweaks on bath salts in their basement, it's not a big deal. But when they go outside and literally eat another person's face, that's kind of a big deal.
Statists of the left who are always talking about how government's going to help the poor and demarginalize marginalized groups. I don't understand this. From the ancient world through the Middle Ages all the way up to modern times, governments have largely conspired against the poor. I'm thinking in particular a century ago with eugenics programs and segregation programs and zoning programs, business regulation and union rules. Everything was designed to exclude, marginalize, and impoverish groups that didn't have power. Governments are always controlled by rich people. That's just the way it works. Why do you think the government is the right means to help the poor? It makes no sense to me.
Thank you for the history lesson, Captain Caveman. I love how 100 years ago is as close to the present time as you're comfortable talking about. The government is a necessary evil. It may not be a great solution, but it is the best solution we have right now. The libertarianism that you seem to be preaching has zero solution for addressing any of these issues.
So I punched this commie face in and said, "How do you like those marks?" Oh, we're recording? Does my hair look okay? How can you claim on one hand to be anti-guns, yet on the other hand, you want the state to take guns away at gunpoint? Pew pew!
Jesus fucking Christ. The social contract provides that it is the state's role to have a monopoly on force to protect the citizens. The Second Amendment doesn't give citizens the right to own guns. It gives them the right to be part of a well-regulated militia and to bear arms as part of that militia. Why do gun nuts always leave out the independent clause in the Second Amendment and spend all their time focused on the dependent clause? I'm serious. Is it ignorance, or do you choose not to understand the Second Amendment?
government has slaughtered 250 million of its own people in acts of democide. How can you trust such a beast to rule over you? And as some of you argue for, to be disarmed to.
Citation required. Are you referring to Stalin during World War II killing his own people? The American government? Or just any random government whose dictator endorses ethnic cleansing?
Why is it that no matter how much money the government takes from its citizens, it's always broke?
I don't know. I would guess it's because they spend way too much money on the military, which is one of the very few purposes of governments that libertarians recognize as legitimate.
If keeping 100% of someone else's income is slavery, then at what percentage is it no longer slavery?
Keeping 100% of someone's income doesn't necessarily mean they are slaves. They can choose not to work because they are not slaves. This is a fucking stupid false analogy.
Can a bunch of people who don't have the right to do a certain thing grant to somebody else the right to do it? And if not, how did Congress acquire the right to do things that you and I don't have the right to do?
It's called the social contract. It's how society functions. Jesus fuck. We give up certain rights to the government in exchange for protection from outside governments and the interior regulation of laws that we as citizens have agreed are important, like the ability to own personal property.
Why are you comfortable spending borrowed money knowing your children will have to pay it off down the line? You're increasing their eventual taxes before they can even vote. Isn't that the definition of taxation without representation?
This is an excellent argument in favor of a balanced budget, but you have yet to demonstrate how a libertarian platform can offer a balanced budget. It seems to me that the best solution to this problem is to go full-blown communism. Then, any debt inherited by the children can be shared equally by everyone. And with the government in charge of the means of production and the outputs, there is no personal property and no personal debt. How do you like those communal apples?
If people are so f***ing greedy and selfish that we need governments to steal from the rich and give to the poor and needy, then why do over 1.5 million charities exist globally, with $373 billion being raised in 2015 alone? And that's not including the Clinton Foundation's money laundering operation. Alleged money laundering operation.
Why is the naked guy the only one making sense here? Can someone answer me that?
You do realize that making something illegal won't make it go away. Guns, drugs, the black market will provide.
Well, alright, Debbie Downer. So your solution is to what? Just do nothing? That's not a libertarian principle. That's a nihilist principle. And I realize that the government can be evil, but sometimes it's a necessary evil. And if it helps keep guns out of the hands of people who may shoot me, I'm okay with that.
Here's some of the money government wasted. The government spent $1.4 million on an app that just simply points left and right for the TSA. That should have been done for way cheaper. Oh, that's not crazy enough for you? How about this? The government wasted $1.4 trillion on a jet that doesn't even work. That's enough to buy every homeless person in the United States a mansion. A $600,000 home. Oh, that's not crazy enough for you. The government lost $6 trillion. Knowing all of this, do you still think the government can spend your money more wisely than you can?
This is a question worth analyzing. First, that airplane that didn't work, it's called research and development. We see failed projects like that from NASA all the time. You know what else NASA's given us? Tang. Well, and other cool stuff too, I guess. But that's not the point. The point is that this type of research, even when it fails, leads to advances in other areas. Private companies are unable to take on projects like this. They couldn't absorb a $1.4 trillion loss. A private company could never replace a government agency like NASA, and yet we derive social gains from NASA and its research. Yes, the government wastes a ton of money, but they also fulfill a role that non-governmental agencies couldn't. 2. I agree that I can spend my money better than the government can. For example, I'd rather purchase my own health insurance and save money for my retirement than pay into Social Security, where I'll probably never see a dime of that money again. But at the same time, libertarians never take into account the tragedy of the commons. Things like building and maintaining an infrastructure and a system of roads for citizens to use, maintaining a police force and a fire department to protect private property, environmental regulations and control to prevent mass pollution. A libertarian framework has no way to address these issues, so sometimes you have to accept the lesser of two evils and have a government to keep society functioning.
How can you rationalize basic philosophical concepts such as the non-aggression principle as being quote-unquote too difficult for society to be educated on and abide by, yet believe that hundreds of thousands of pages of federal and state regulations, clauses, case files, and amendments are somehow easier?
Well, that's a loaded question if ever I've heard one. The non-aggression principle isn't difficult to understand. The real problem with it is that it doesn't address all the necessary issues needed to form a complete social contract and civil society. It provides many excellent guidelines, but as I discussed previously, it doesn't address the tragedy of the commons. Individuals aren't motivated to share the burden of economic and social issues where others' interests are concerned. The non-aggression principle has no problem with letting the roads crumble and decay, the lakes and rivers turning into toxic sludge, or the poor being exploited for the sake of the wealthy. You guys are killing me here. Personally, many of my political views are libertarian, but you have to realize that when taken to the extreme, just like any other political platform, you create an ideologically pure platform that is so inflexible it can't even recognize that it isn't the perfect answer for every issue. We're about a third of the way through. I hope you come back and join me for the next installment. Leave me a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. But most importantly, have a great night.